Right, and so to Colombia. And this is a little bit longer, this one, so we'll probably have 2 chapters. Yeah, well, I accepted the job in Colombia and rejected the wonderful offer to Brunei. But in fact, later on in my career, we did end up in Brunei. But that's another story. Anyway, we were very excited to accept the job in Colombia. I remember arriving in Cali and being met by Jack, my boss, at the airport. We were put up in a hotel with the other 17 new teachers. We were the very last to arrive. It was a very long journey. Maria was pregnant with Roger. The next day, Jack took me to the school and he started to tell me about the job that he wanted me to do. Now, so many times this has happened to me in my career. Being offered a job, the details of which are not disclosed until after arrival in the host country. Not to be recommended, all you young, ambitious young world travellers. Well, who was to blame for this? Well, I suppose it was me, of course. I was very naive. I remember Jack saying to me at this meeting, "Boy, you're going to be very busy." Ha ha ha. I chuckled amiably. He must have thought I was a real fool. Well, in fact, I think I was. Anyway, I chuckled amiably, naively, at the time. It turned out to be a serious understatement. It was an absurd job description, both from the point of view of quantity and quality. However, Jack was shrewd enough to know that I was naive enough not to know. In addition to a 50% teaching load, I had the huge area of responsibility for discipline in the school. I was also the International Baccalaureate coordinator. More importantly, it was only after I had been in Cali for several weeks that I learned the truth about what had happened in the year before my appointment. What Jack hadn't told me in the interview in Belfast was that there had been a scandal at the school involving the final year students. Apparently, these students had tried to bribe the guy who worked the photocopier to give them some exam papers before school tests. Now, these exams were very important because the marks counted towards admission to the universities. The scam was discovered, and Jack was horrified. It was difficult for him to know what to do with the students, because some of them were well connected to board members. So I was told that even the son of the chairman was involved, although I don't know whether that detail is correct or not. Anyway, eventually Jack decided to expel the students, a very courageous move. However, the consequences of the expulsions went far beyond what he or anyone could have expected in their wildest dreams or nightmares. There were divisions among parents, and I understand the school was almost closed as a result of this scandal. This is just before my arrival. Jack survived somehow, but only just. He had a lot of palancas, which was the Spanish word for friends in high places, after 14 years. But he had to call in some of these favours in order to win this battle. People said that in his latter years, Jack had become quite distant from the day-to-day running of the school. He left it in the hands of his senior teacher, who was an exceptionally kind man, but not particularly strong with respect to discipline. The school discipline had therefore become slack. Jack blamed him for the scandal. Enter, stage left, Don as vice rector and head of discipline. Well, I was so naive in those days. I was so very excited at the prospect of such a responsible position. I was newly married and on cloud 19. I knew the job was going to be full on, as they say in Australia, but that was not going to daunt me. I was invincible. I was 33. I set about my task of cleaning up the discipline with relish. I monitored what was going on with the Jefe de Bachillerato, head of the secondary section. He'd been running the discipline in the secondary section, and after a month, I was staggered at what I found. He was using a Friday detention system to punish miscreants. And the number of students, though, entered for detention was often listed between 30 and 40 each week. Each detention had to be approved by the Jefe de Bachillerato. I then visited these Friday afternoon detentions to find that there were often less than 10 students actually attending the detention. In some cases, I found out that the Jefe de Bachillerato had overruled the teacher, or in other cases, the student had simply not turned up for the detention. To my young and inexperienced mind, the situation seemed perfectly ridiculous. How could 40 students on a list be reduced to 10? The situation was made even more ludicrous by the fact that when I visited the detentions, students appeared to be playing cards, thus, in my opinion, defeating the whole purpose of the detention. Anyway, I made a full report to Jack, and he was delighted and asked me to produce a plan to improve the system. Easy, I proposed, that any student who did not attend the Friday detention would have a Saturday detention, which I personally would supervise. Any student who failed to turn up for Saturday would be suspended for 3 days. Jack thought this was a great idea, and it was immediately put into practice. The effects were far-reaching. First of all, students got worked up about the idea, especially the final year students. They had a meeting in the science lab to discuss these initiatives. They resolved to press for my removal, the new vice principal. The Jefe de Bachillerato was also furious at what he saw as the erosion of his power and did his best to show solidarity with the final year students in an attempt to undermine my position. The most positive effect was, of course, that the discipline improved and students were no longer found wandering around in the corridor during class time. I was pleased, and Jack was delighted. However, I was just beginning to feel quite satisfied with myself when Jack announced to me casually one morning that he'd had a very stormy board meeting the previous evening, in which it was suggested that I be sacked and asked to return home. It took me a while to figure out what my boss, Jack, meant when he had said, "Good news, you're not going to be sent home. I had our first board meeting last night and there was a move to have you sent home, but it was defeated. But it was a close thing." "Oh, good," I said with a grimace which masked terror and a total lack of comprehension. They wouldn't have dared, thought I. Would they? A mere youth of but 33. I didn't know any better. This was my first experience of the vagaries of life in the corridors of power. Another incident concerned an English couple whom Maria and I had met when we were sitting down at the sports club relaxing on a Sunday. They were newcomers too, and they sidled up to us and started rubbishing the school and Jack, which did make me feel a little bit uncomfortable. They were not happy at all. They were unhappy with everything. And eventually I thought I have to mention this to Jack. I don't know, perhaps that's why they mentioned it to me. I couldn't be sure. Anyway, I dutifully reported their disaffection to Jack, and Jack thanked me profusely, commended me for my loyalty. I experienced for the first time the exhilaration of knowing I had pleased my boss. By the way, he said, do you think you could write a report about this incident? I had a fleeting moment of disquiet at this, but it quickly passed. And Jack put the letter in the appropriate file, if you follow me. 2 years later, when he didn't want to renew the contracts of this couple, he waived the letter which I had written in front of them. And that, of course, made me really popular with the couple, as you can imagine. Now, as luck would have it, this couple left the school 2 years later and went on to Mexico City to a school called Green Gates. And that's exactly what I did. So this couple ended up in the same school as me 2 years later. You can imagine. Actually, they were very good about it, and we actually got on quite well in Mexico. But what a coincidence that was. I couldn't believe it. So anyway, I began to realize that I had been very naive. I've always had this perfectionist and, idealistic streak, which made me believe things are black and white, Clearly, they're not always black and white. They're grey. I was unnerved by Jack's comments and began to realize for the first time the reality that the fortune of my family was in the hands of these people on the board and of Jack himself. And my belief in natural justice began to erode. Nevertheless, I pursued my policy with, in retrospect anyway, some success during the following 18 months. Without a doubt, any objective observer would have agreed that the discipline at the end of my 2 years in the Colombo Botanico had vastly improved. But from that time on, I was going to be much more careful.